Podcast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting your ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to ROIThe facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The Bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome to the Bullvine Podcast, where dairy innovation meets practical solutions for every farm, every day. I'm your host, and today we're tackling one of the most persistent and frustrating challenges in the business: chronic, repeat mastitis cases. Why does the same cow keep coming back to your hospital pen? And what if the answer isn't just a better treatment, but better timing? We'll break down the 72-hour secret, a game-changing insight from Dutch and US research that's helping producers go from hospital pens full of repeat offenders to some days with none at all. Stay tuned for a conversation that might just change the way you manage mastitis forever.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation. Today, we're cutting right to the heart of something that doesn't just drain time and money, but, fundamentally undermines morale. That relentless cycle of repeat mastitis cases.
Yeah, and this isn't about finding like a marginally better antibiotic or just tweaking the dosage on your current tube. We're diving deep into some truly disruptive research that basically suggests we've been operating on the wrong biological timeline entirely. For every producer, every single employee who's had that just crushing frustration of treating the same cow 3 times in a month, only to see her pop right back up on the sick list 10 days later. Okay. Well, this is going to be maybe the most crucial deep dive we've ever done.
That's absolutely right. Our mission today is really to unpack the science behind this observation. The research suggests that repeat mastitis isn't primarily an antibiotic resistance problem. No, it is a critical systemic timing problem. It's what the researchers are actually calling the 72-hour secret. We're going to trace the path from the microscopic biology of bacteria forming these protective fortresses right through to the macroeconomics of why preventative planning pays off so dramatically.
We're going to dive into the specific data, that biological clock that really governs infection, and the financial documentation from farms that are actually running these prevention protocols. And importantly, the radical management shift that's required to truly break this cycle.
Okay, let's start with some context. If you are currently dealing with persistent illness, you know the stakes are just astronomical. It's the constant cost of treatments, the perpetual milk withdrawal periods that interrupt your flow, the lost labor hours, and then ultimately the premature culling of otherwise really high potential animals. We're not talking about just a few dollars here and there. We're talking about undermining the genetic progress you've worked years, maybe decades, to achieve.
Exactly. And when you look at the industry average, that persistent recurring issue, it's usually concentrated in the same 15 to 20% of the herd. These aren't just random events happening. They are systemic failures of our current, reactive approach. They are the cows that clog up the hospital pen and consume the best labor hours of your most experienced staff.
Right. And the research we are analyzing today, it stems primarily from work by AHV International, driven in conjunction with Utrecht University. And the impulse behind this was just sheer frustration, specifically on the part of Dr. G.J. Schriefland, a veterinarian who, for years, saw traditional treatments fail in the exact same frustrating pattern. It was, the definition of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
And what the research promises.
Yeah.
Well, that's why we as farmers really have to pay attention. The documented potential payoff is nothing less than aspirational. 0 hospital pen days are actually possible. Now, as a practical farmer myself, that sounds like pure fantasy, right? Something maybe reserved for those top genetic elite herds. But when you really start to quantify the tangible and the intangible costs of persistent illness, the lost production, the labor involved, the drag on morale, if we can consistently empty that hospital pen, the savings just compound exponentially. It's not just saving on tubes, it's saving the cow herself. It's keeping her productive.
But here's where the conversation gets controversial, and where it really challenges established norms. The solution derived from this research involves disrupting the core bacterial communication mechanism, quorum sensing, using non-traditional means. Specifically, we're talking about oral applications of highly targeted plant compounds. Now, this is a radical, almost heretical shift from the decades-long reliance on targeted, intramammary injection or injectable systemic antibiotics.
Yeah, that's where my skepticism meter kind of pegs out a little bit. For generations, we've been taught that mastitis is a localized problem, right? It requires localized treatment. So introducing a systemic oral product designed to manage disease challenges the very foundation of how we approach udder health. It means moving from a reactive, localized fight to a strategic, full-body biological management plan. And frankly, it requires absolute trust in the underlying science.
Okay, let's unpack the core biological failure we've been sort of perpetuating on our farms. We need to start by describing that frustrating cycle everyone knows. The cow gets treated, the clinical signs clear up, the quarter shrinks, the milk looks clean, she's released back into the string, she looks fine for maybe 10 or 14 days, and then bam, she relapses with the identical infection in the exact same quarter. And we always chalk this up to antibiotic resistance or maybe a failed immune system.
And we as farmers, we tend to blame the cow or maybe the product. We assume, we use the wrong protocol or that the organism is just simply too tough. But the cost of treating that chronic offender 3 or 4 times, it just dwarfs any profit she ever generates.
But this scientific breakthrough explains why the relapse occurs. And it's not just that the bacteria are randomly surviving. No, it's coordinated bacterial communication, a biological mechanism known as quorum sensing. Think of it like a coordinated military operation almost. Individual bacteria, they don't act alone when their numbers are small. They wait. They wait until they have reached a quorum, a critical mass, to coordinate an attack and, crucially, to build a collective defense.
So they're not just existing there passively. They are actively organizing and communicating with each other. They are essentially counting their numbers, saying, okay, we have enough forces now. Let's put up the shield and start causing trouble.
And that shield is the biofilm. This is where we need to get just a little bit technical for a moment, because understanding the biofilm structure is absolutely key to understanding the 72-hour secret. The biofilm isn't just bacteria, it's a highly organized protective fortress. It's made primarily of a robust, slimy, extracellular polymeric substance, basically a polysaccharide matrix. Think of it as literal biological cement mixed with sugars, proteins, and even DNA.
Wait, hold on. So it's not just a layer of bacteria floating around. It's a physical, structural fortress designed specifically to keep defenses out, like our treatments and the cow's immune system.
Exactly. And the thickness and complexity of this matrix are what determines whether our treatments will work or fail. It's that simple. The research breaks down this critical 72-hour timeline based entirely on the maturity of this biofilm. So in the initial 0 to 24-hour window, we have individual, what they call planktonic bacteria. They're vulnerable. They're exposed. They are exposed to the cow's natural immune response. And importantly, intramammary antibiotics are highly effective because they can directly access the target bacteria. The cow's system can usually handle this stage pretty easily. Now, move to 24 to 48 hours. Okay, this is the real danger zone. The bacteria reach their quorum. Coordination starts, the chemical signaling turns on the genetic switches, and the first defensive protocols, that initial slime layer, are put in place. Treatment applied now is already much more challenging because the bacteria are transitioning from individual targets to a coordinated collective unit. You've basically passed the optimal window for easy treatment. And finally, 48 to 72 hours. This is the moment of failure for traditional treatments. The biofilm matures. It becomes that robust, multi-layered protective fortress, the citadel we mentioned. The structure is now so dense that antibiotics, which, rely on diffusion and high concentration gradients, simply struggle and often completely fail to penetrate to the core population inside. They might kill the few bacteria attempting to leave the fortress, those on the perimeter, but the bulk of the population is safely locked inside, protected. After 72 hours, it's an established citadel, and any treatment becomes temporary, leading directly to that inevitable relapse 10 to 14 days later.
Hold on, that means, wow. That changes literally everything about our traditional herd management approach. As farmers, we are trained to look for clinical signs, right?
Yeah.
The swollen quarter, the flakes in the strip cup, the visual discomfort, and those symptoms, they rarely appear on day 1 or 2. For many chronic cases, those clinical signs don't pop up until day 7, maybe even later.
Precisely, exactly.
That means we are always structurally late to the party. Our herd check protocols, our treatment decisions, they're designed to treat the symptom that appears on day 7. But by that time, the bacteria are already protected inside a biofilm that was built and fully matured on day 3. We are literally fighting a castle that we stood by and allowed to be built right under our noses.
We're designing our labor, our protocols, our entire treatment strategy around the cow's appearance, not around the clear, unforgiving biological clock of the bacteria themselves.
And that perfectly explains why we see the same cow clear up after treatment. Because, yeah, we knocked back the perimeter forces, those easy-to-kill individual bacteria floating around. But the core infection, protected by that polysaccharide matrix, it just hunkers down. It waits. It waits until the drug residue clears. Maybe the cow gets stressed by a heat wave or a feed change, and then, boom, the bacteria exit the fortress again and trigger the relapse. That's the very definition of a chronic case. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to the industry context. It's really telling that this breakthrough came out of the Netherlands. Why there? Well, they faced heavy government-imposed antibiotic restrictions much sooner and, frankly, more severely than we did here in North America. They reached a point where they simply could not just reach for a stronger or a newer drug when the first one failed. They were forced, really forced, to solve the biological problem, rather than just relying on pharmaceutical brute force.
Yeah, necessity is definitely the mother of invention, or in this case, maybe revolutionary change. Dr. Streefland and the Utrecht researchers, they realized that if they couldn't effectively kill the bacteria inside the fortress, they had to prevent the fortress from being built in the first place, or find a way to dismantle it from the inside out. This really forced them to investigate these non-traditional biological avenues, like those highly specific plant compounds that actually disrupt quorum sensing.
And that brings us right back to the most counterintuitive aspect of this entire protocol. The fact that these compounds are effective when administered orally. I have to challenge this again, Sarah. As producers, like I said, I was trained the udder is a local, highly protected system. How on earth do these compounds survive the high acid environment of the stomach, and maybe more importantly, the highly efficient microbial breakdown process of the rumen, to then travel systemically through the cow and reach the site of the infection, the mammary gland, to disrupt the biofilm? That's a massive biological hurdle we haven't fully discussed.
No, that is the essential question, absolutely. And the answer, according to the sources, lies in the specific formulation. They stress that these are not traditional antibiotics. They are highly stable, targeted molecules derived from specific plant extracts. Their function isn't to kill bacteria directly. Instead, it's to neutralize the specific signaling molecules used for quorum sensing. And because they are apparently designed to survive that digestive process, they enter the bloodstream and get distributed throughout the tissues, including the mammary gland.
Okay, so if the compound basically stops the bacteria from talking to each other, the fortress either never gets built properly or an existing fortress starts to crumble because the internal structure loses coordination.
Yeah.
That must be why the source material quotes Dr. Streefland saying that being able to remove biofilms out of tissues with a non-antibiotic oral application was really spectacular. It just fundamentally challenges our entire understanding of drug delivery and infection control in the dairy animal.
And it requires a massive mental shift. This is really where the Bullvine's contrarian analysis comes in strongly. Our industry, let's be honest, is conditioned to be excellent at treating sick cows. We pride ourselves on the meticulousness of our hospital pen protocols. We know how to diagnose which tube to use for which test result, and we often look at a well-managed sick pen as a sign of excellent management.
Right. But here's the challenge I'd put to the listener. Success in this new preventative paradigm. It looks like nothing happening. Success is an empty hospital pen. It requires intervening before problems are even visible at dry-off, during that critical fresh cow transition, maybe before a major heat stress event. If you're celebrating a successful treatment on day 7, you've already lost the 72-hour war. You've ceded the critical ground to the biofilm days ago.
And this shift, it's deeply uncomfortable for established models. The source material notes, and this is interesting, that some veterinarians initially resist this approach because it challenges their traditional service models. Yeah. If you reduce the number of emergency calls and the need for frequent high-cost treatments, well, the nature of the veterinary relationship has to evolve, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The vet moves from being, the reactive savior, the one who rushes out at 2 a.m. with a syringe, to more of a strategic consultant. They start helping the producer manage the herd health budget, longevity, reproduction, all proactively. That's arguably a higher value service, focusing on data analysis and strategic planning rather than just reactive response. But it requires both the farmer and the vet to kind of let go of the old way of doing business, which is a management and honestly a psychological challenge, just as much as it is a biological one. You are essentially trading certainty, a known treatment protocol that feels familiar, for anticipation, a preventative strategy that feels a bit newer.
Okay, let's follow the money, because dairy farming is, we all know, a tight margin business, and a preventative protocol definitely requires upfront investment. The documented financial trials, however, they make a pretty compelling case for a rapid return on that investment. Let's look closely at the Giacometti farm trial in California. This involved 450 cows. This trial compared a control group using traditional management with a prevention group utilizing these new protocols, the ones focused on quorum sensing disruption. The result: the prevention group produced 193 pounds more milk per cow across the entire lactation.
Wow. 193 pounds. That's not just a marginal gain, that's significant. That's the result of not having those withdrawal periods, not dealing with lower peak production because of subclinical issues, and not losing entire segments of the lactation curve while cows recover. If we use a conservative estimate, say $17 per hundredweight, which is a decent middle-of-the-road price these days, that translates to approximately $33 per cow in additional milk revenue alone.
Now scale that up. If you are a 1,000 cow dairy, we're talking about an extra $33,000 in revenue just from improved production efficiency, just from milk volume and avoiding withdrawal. But the deeper money, arguably, is in the concept of cost avoidance. We haven't even really touched labor, antibiotics, or reproduction yet.
Right, and it's definitely not just the milk check. We have to document the reproductive performance gains, which are often the truest indicator of overall cow health and farm profitability. The U.S. trials, which spanned over 20,000 cows across multiple operation sizes, documented a statistically significant 7.4% better conception rate at first service. That's 42.1% versus 39.2%. That's a big jump.
Think about the implications of that kind of jump in conception rates for your voluntary waiting period, for your overall profitability. We're talking massive gains in efficiency here. And UK operations, they reported an average of 28 fewer days open. That is almost a full month shaved off, maximizing the cow's fertility window.
Let's just do some quick conservative math on that. That $98 per cow saving, if we use, say, $3.50 per day. Open is the conservative cost estimate, and that's pretty conservative. What does that cover? It's not just the feed she eats while she's open. It covers the opportunity cost of her not producing milk at her highest potential, the labor involved in rebreeding her, the cost of semen, the management time spent chasing those non-pregnant cows. $98 saved per cow per lactation. That translates directly to nearly $100,000 in cost avoidance for that same 1,000 cow operation, just from improvements in the breeding barn. It adds up fast.
But the most staggering financial point, I think, for long-term viability, what truly changes the trajectory of a dairy operation, is the longevity factor. Research tracking nearly 65,000 Dutch animals found that cows on these robust prevention protocols lived an average of 8.5 months longer in the herd.
8.5 months. Just let that sink in. That's nearly a full additional lactation added back to their productive life cycle on average. If a cow survives longer, you are simply replacing fewer animals annually. And the cost of a replacement heifer, whether you raise her yourself or purchase her, is often the second or third highest expenditure on any dairy farm. Extending productive life by over half a year fundamentally changes your capital reinvestment strategy.
And this is exactly where the herd genetics shift really happens. Instead of being forced to cull a cow because she's a chronic mastitis case that constantly lands in the hospital pen, a survival culling decision, basically, you are now culling purely for better genetics or maybe lower overall production compared to her peers. You get to select the best cows to stay, accelerating your genetic progress exponentially. You've fundamentally changed the culling criteria from survival to performance.
And let's not forget the hidden savings, which are equally crucial, especially in today's tight labor market. Farms consistently report saving 2 to 3 hours daily on average, just by reducing the labor needed to treat those repeat offenders, handle milk withholding protocols, and manage the sheer complexity of the hospital pen. That time is instantly shifted to higher value tasks, whether it's managing feed bunks more carefully, monitoring fresh cows more closely, or simply allowing your best employees to focus on facility maintenance or training newer staff. That's a huge morale boost too, and a definite reduction in operational chaos.
Furthermore, there's the metabolic health connection, which is fascinating. The trials showed a 32% reduction in metabolic issues during those critical first 60 days postpartum. We know metabolic problems, ketosis, DAs, milk fever, they're not isolated events, are they? They are often the gateway to systemic inflammation and a whole cascade of problems. And that includes increasing susceptibility to mastitis. So, by maintaining a lower overall bacterial load and reducing that chronic inflammation linked to recurring infections, you are improving the cow's entire systemic resilience during her most vulnerable period.
So the ROI seems pretty clear, doesn't it? Despite the, yes, necessary higher upfront cost of implementing comprehensive prevention protocols, the documented payback is consistently hitting within that crucial 12 to 18 months window. The combined revenue from the bump in milk, the reproductive efficiency gains, and the enormous cost avoidance of replacement cows makes this investment quickly self-funding for most operations, provided, and this is key, they commit to the new management philosophy.
Okay, we need to anchor all this science and finance in real-world operational proof, because the case studies are what makes this really compelling, particularly for a skeptical audience like ours often is.
Let's start with Peter Smith at LT Smith & Sons up in New York. A 1,700 cow operation. His farm was seeing pretty standard, frustrating results before, but his results after adopting the prevention protocol, they're dramatic. His rate of culling specifically for udder health dropped from 1 in 3 cows down to just 1 in 7. That is a massive reduction in involuntary culling. He publicly reports having 10 to 12 more cows in the milking string every single day because they simply aren't in withdrawal, stuck in the hospital pen, or already in the cull queue.
But the astonishing fact, the one that truly just stops you in your tracks, is what he reported about his hospital pen status. Smith stated that some days his operation recorded 0 cows in the hospital pen for udder health issues. 0. And he noted this had never ever happened in his 30 years of dairying.
Just think about that for a minute. 0 cows needing treatment. That's not just a financial victory, it's a profound quality of life shift. Imagine the sheer morale boost for the milking crew on a cold early Monday morning when they realize they don't have to pull and treat a dozen chronic offenders. That's reduced labor stress, reduced decision fatigue for managers, and a huge win for employee retention, something that, honestly, no dollar calculation can fully capture.
Then you have Trevor Nutcher out in California. His experience is arguably the most extreme optimization we've seen documented so far. The data shows he hasn't used a single mastitis tube since switching protocols, not one. His large hospital pen is often empty. And when cows do need proactive support for some reason, they're back milking in an average of just 2.5 days, compared to the typical week or even longer that farmers usually budget for recovery and withdrawal.
A week versus 2.5 days. That difference is immediately measurable in milk volume and labor saved. And the fact that he stopped using tubes altogether, that suggests a complete reliance on managing the biological environment proactively rather than constantly fighting the infection chemically after it starts. This is maybe the ultimate proof of concept for the power of understanding that 72-hour secret.
And now, left with the ultimate resilience test. Joe Soares, who, during that tumultuous 2024 H5N1 outbreak, inadvertently conducted a real-world controlled experiment. It's fascinating. He operates 2 facilities. One was utilizing these robust prevention protocols we're discussing, and the other was running on traditional management methods.
Yeah, the contrast was incredibly stark. The facility that was already managing bacterial load through prevention protocols recovered from the viral hit in just 3 days. Compare that to months of disruption at the traditional protocol facility. The key insight here seems to be about immune resource allocation. If the cows aren't already spending significant immune energy constantly fighting dormant, biofilm-protected bacteria, they have a massive reserve of immunological resources ready to dedicate entirely to fighting a novel viral threat like H5N1 when it comes along.
And the production difference during that recovery period just underlines the operational resilience gained. The prevention group produced 88 pounds of milk daily during recovery. Compare that versus only 77 pounds at the traditional facility. That 11-pound difference, sustained over weeks, demonstrates that the systemic health provided by the preventative approach really acts as an operational buffer during any kind of crisis.
And this resilience isn't just about something specific like H5N1 either. This matters during any major stress event you face on the farm. Think about the brutal peak of summer heat waves, unexpected cold snaps, intense humidity spikes, or even sudden unavoidable feed changes. If your cows aren't already fighting those internal unseen battles with dormant biofilms, their overall immunity is just dramatically stronger when any new threat hits the herd.
Okay, we've established that this approach seems to work. Now, the big question. Who can implement this? Does this only really work for the massive operations with, hundreds of thousands of dollars in disposable capital?
Absolutely not. For large operations, say 1,000+ cows, the economics work extremely well just due to scale. The labor reduction alone often justifies the cost for them. They could free up employees, offer their highest skilled people to focus on higher value tasks like fresh cow monitoring or managing genomic selection programs. Plus, if they're already using integrated tracking systems like DairyComp or PCDORT, integrating these new preventative data points is usually pretty straightforward.
I would actually argue the mid-sized dairy, maybe 300, 900, and 999 cows, might see the largest relative operational impact. They're large enough to benefit from the cost avoidance scale, sure, but they're also small enough that freeing up 2 to 3 hours of the owner-operators or their lead employees' daily time is a complete game changer. That time suddenly becomes available for strategic business planning, focusing on quality of life, or just not constantly putting out fires. It's about escaping that reactive crisis management cycle.
And for smaller operations, under 300 cows, yeah, the per cow investment might look higher on paper initially, but when every single cow counts towards your bottom line, that longevity factor becomes absolutely critical for survival. Extending that productive life by 8.5 months on average, and the massive time savings if the owner-operator is doing their own treatments, well, that often ensures the financial viability of the entire farm. They can potentially afford to have fewer total animals, knowing those animals will produce longer and more efficiently.
We also have to look briefly at niche applications, like grazing operations. The documented data showing improved conception rates is absolutely crucial for seasonal calving systems, where hitting that tight 365-day calving interval is paramount for profitability. And in a grass-based system, where labor is often more scattered and management may be less intensive day-to-day, preventing problems with an oral systemic approach is far more valuable than trying to chase down and treat issues after the fact.
And this truly points to where the entire industry seems to be heading globally, Sarah. Dr. Jeff Ackert, who is AHV's technical director, notes very similar bacterial behavior, this quorum sensing and biofilm formation, in poultry, swine, and even aquaculture. So this isn't just a dairy solution we're talking about. This is likely the future of managing bacterial load universally as antibiotic pressure continues to increase worldwide. It's a biological strategy that kind of transcends species, offering a non-antibiotic pathway to improve the animal health and ultimately better operational efficiency across the board.
Now, Jake, let's inject some of that necessary Bullvine skepticism back in here. This isn't a magic bullet, right? What are the realistic challenges or reasons a farmer listening might pause before jumping in with both feet?
Okay, fair point. The first pause has to be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? We have to acknowledge that some operations out there already have excellent health results, really low culling rates, already tight days open, manageable hospital pen populations. They might not see the massive immediate ROI that others would. They've likely already got the environmental and management variables largely under control. The second big challenge is definitely the learning curve. This requires commitment, understanding when to strategically intervene. At dry-off during the fresh period, maybe anticipating specific stress events, it takes practice and a willingness to commit to collecting and analyzing new data streams.
That's fair. But we also have to remember the source material's use of that Einstein analogy, which I thought was quite good. If you are tracking your data and you are seeing the same 15 to 20% of your cows cycling repeatedly through your hospital pen clearing up, then relapsing, you are stuck in a frustrating, costly pattern. You are doing the same thing over and over and getting the same frustrating result. The biology of that 72-hour window is clear. The choice, really, is whether you are willing to work with that biological clock or just keep fighting an established fortress that you inadvertently allowed to be built.
And the final skeptical challenge, I think, remains that of trust and independence. Some producers will understandably want to see more independent research, maybe from major universities they trust, before committing fully to new, non-traditional protocols, especially given the cost. This is a significant upfront investment, let's not downplay that, and it's a major shift in herd management philosophy. So the decision really has to weigh the current extensive field documentation against the individual farmer's comfort level with trying a new biological approach that definitely challenges decades of accepted veterinary practice.
The bottom line, though, seems to be this. If you are chronically frustrated by those repeat offenders, those cows that just live in the hospital pen, the evidence strongly suggests that the reason is not just bad luck, and it's not simply an issue of antibiotic resistance in most cases. It's fundamentally an issue of bad timing that allows that impenetrable biofilm fortress to form. All right, Jake, let's bring it home for the listeners. The farmer listening just finished morning milking. They're driving to the feed store, probably thinking about those chronic offenders right now. What are the 3 critical actionable steps they need to take right now based on this deep dive into the 72-hour secret?
Okay, 3 steps. First, we need to start with data collection that specifically targets this potential biofilm problem. 1, immediate action this week. Track the hospital pen pattern Get out there and create a simple, dedicated tracking sheet right away. Which specific cows enter the treatment pen, how long do they stay, and most critically, do they return within 30 days? Write it down. Get out there and create a simple, dedicated tracking sheet right away. The goal here isn't just to track treatments generically, but to confirm if you are dealing with that systemic, chronic biofilm problem that affects the same 15 to 20% of your cows repeatedly. If you confirm that cycle exists on your farm, you know your current treatment protocols are failing the 72-hour test, period.
Right. That identifies the target group within the herd. Now for the strategy shift. What's next?
2. Medium-term strategy, next 3 to 6 months. Implement prevention protocols strategically. Focus your intervention efforts on the 2 most critical points where that bacterial clock essentially resets. Dry off, remember trials show up to a 70% reduction in milk leakage and subsequent infection risk when managed proactively, and the fresh cow transition. These are the silent periods where biofilms often start forming completely unseen. Focus your intervention efforts on the 2 most critical points where that bacterial clock essentially resets. And importantly, start thinking about shifting your veterinary relationship. Stop relying solely on emergency calls. Start prioritizing strategic planning in consultation with your vet. Focus the budget conversation on longevity and overall herd resilience, not just on reactionary treatment costs.
Makes sense. Proactive versus reactive. And the long-term payoff.
3. Long-term positioning, next 1-2 years. Shift culling strategy for maximum profit. Target that documented 12 to 18-month payback window we talked about. Once you successfully extend the productive life of your average cow by that documented 8.5 months, you're no longer forced to cull primarily for chronic health issues like mastitis. This is huge. It allows you to leverage your improved herd health success and shift your culling criteria to focus entirely on improving genetics and production efficiency. You get to keep your highest performing, most genetically valuable animals in the herd longer, fundamentally accelerating your farm's progress and profitability. So this has been another pretty intense deep dive from the Bullvine Podcast. The core insight, I think, remains clear. Repeat mastitis is very often not a failure of the drug. It is a timing failure due to that 72-hour biofilm secret. We strongly encourage you to use the documented financial and biological data we discussed today to really inform your next operational decisions. We've got links to the key research in those case studies over at www.thebullvine.com.
And seriously, subscribe wherever you get your deep dives and podcasts. We're releasing high-value episodes like this twice weekly now, and trust me, you really don't want to miss what we have coming up. But I want to leave you with one final, maybe provocative question to consider while you're maybe running some numbers or looking at your hospital pen list. What would 0 hospital pen days actually mean for your quality of life, for your employee satisfaction and retention, and for your ability to finally focus your valuable energy on high-level production improvements and strategic genetic planning? That potential shift. That's the real game changer here. Join us next week as we tackle how dramatically shifting commodity pricing is likely going to affect replacement heifer management strategies looking ahead into 2025.
Sounds good. We'll see you then.
That's it for today's episode of the Bullvine Podcast. If you're ready to try something different with your mastitis strategy, remember, timing matters more than ever. Be sure to check out the full article and resources at thebullvine.com, and don't forget to track your hospital pen. See if you spot your own 72-hour pattern starting tomorrow. Thanks for listening, and as always, keep challenging what's possible in your dairy. See you next time.